Welcome to Hamilton College. We're here in the Burke Library, third floor, Special Collections. My name is Christian Goodwillie. I'm the Director and Curator of Special Collections. Today we're going to be doing a short survey of materials we have in our collection related to the African experience in the Atlantic world and also slavery. And we've got quite a nice range of materials here from the 19th century. The anti-slavery movement in the United States had its beginnings in the late 18th century amongst particularly Quakers in Pennsylvania, but by the 1820s it had moved to New England, where men like William Lloyd Garrison were beginning to agitate actively against slavery and proactively facilitate the escape of slaves from the South. This is Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator, which ran for many, many years and continued through the Civil War. This is an issue from 1864. But you can see here that the masthead of the newspaper, that's the illustrated section where the title is, has many illustrations of events associated with slavery. Now, Hamilton College students were, for the most part, abolitionists, or at the very least, anti-slavery, and even petitioned the state of New York to become more active on a national level to fight against slavery. Slavery was abolished here in New York State in 1827. So students here at the college subscribed contemporaneously to publications like this. This is an issue of the Quarterly Anti-Slavery magazine, and it's from 1836, and it's been here at the college ever since that date. We also have another serial publication here from the collection, The Anti-Slavery Record, Volume 1, from 1835. Published by the American Anti-Slavery Society. So the printing press and the dissemination of first-hand accounts by slaves was one of the real tipping points in terms of national awareness of the experience of enslaved people. So the Anti-Slavery Examiner, the same publisher that published the serial we just looked at, began to publish first-hand accounts of slavery taken directly from the stories of escaped slaves themselves. So here's one such narrative of a man named James Williams. And people that were able to read these first-hand accounts, the horrors of slavery hit them much more directly, and they were much more apt to support the abolition of slavery. Another very, very key development happened in books, and this is another one, 1834, so you're probably getting the sense now the 1830s were a very crucial time. This is The Picture of Slavery. So picture, we have wood-engraved images of slavery, and the pictures, I think, were what finally awakened many, many Northerners to what was going on in many other parts of the Union. Of course, you had the controversy over the expansion of slavery into newly forming Western states, and many Northeasterners wanting at all costs to have no more slave states admitted into the Union. Here's an engraving of a slave auction at Richmond, Virginia. So books like The Picture of Slavery were extremely important. A very pivotal moment in this story comes with the publication of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. And Douglass had escaped from bondage in Maryland. He had learned to read and write, went to Massachusetts, and quickly teamed up with Garrison and other major figures in the anti-slavery movement and published his own autobiography here, which became one of the very first national bestsellers in terms of a book written by someone formerly enslaved. And Douglass then, of course, became a national figure, visited with Abraham Lincoln, was actually even asked to be the vice presidential running mate of the first woman to run for president, Victoria Woodhull. So he led quite an amazing life. Ended up in Rochester, New York, where he published his own newspaper called the North Star and was active in the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad, of course, was the system of sympathetic people who were willing to help slaves get out of the South. Upstate New York was a very, very active region for the Underground Railroad. And as a matter of fact, in Syracuse, there was even a famous incident called the Jerry Rescue, where a man who was imprisoned as an escaped slave named Jerry, this is in the mid-1850s if I remember right, was freed by an angry anti-slavery mob and let to go on his way. So upstate New York's always been a place where abolitionism and anti-slavery agitation have had a home. This book here by William Still, an African-American man, is from 1872, so only 7 years after the Civil War. And this is his actual compilation of oral accounts of the Underground Railroad. So this is one of the most important primary sources that exists anywhere of people's experiences actually escaping from slavery and how they did it. This is the original publication of that. Harriet Tubman, of course, lived here in upstate New York. Her home is in Auburn, New York. You can go visit it. And one of Hamilton's very own, class of 1816, Gerrit Smith, was an ardent abolitionist, and we have here a copy of his book, The Speeches of Gerrit Smith in Congress. Smith had a very large operation in a nearby town called Peterborough, where he established a school for runaway slaves or for free black people. So he was actively trying to provide education and a livelihood. He also leased a lot of farmland that he owned at very, very low rates to free African Americans or escaped slaves. And then most controversially, he was among what's known as the Secret Six. The Secret Six were the anonymous people that funded John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, which basically was a terrorist insurrection against the United States military and government. But of course, Brown's purpose was to liberate the arms at Harper's Ferry and then pass them out amongst enslaved African Americans and foment a slave rebellion, an armed slave rebellion, and then trigger the Civil War. It kind of all ended up happening that way, even though Brown's raid was unsuccessful. Smith was so nervous that his role in funding Brown would be discovered that he actually ended up having a nervous breakdown. He did recover eventually, and he never changed his opinions about slavery or racism or any of that. Eventually his role was discovered, but many years later, beyond the time when anyone wanted to do anything about it. So a remarkable guy, and again, one of Hamilton's alums. Lastly, I'm going to show you this manuscript. This is from the British Caribbean. Historians in the last 20 plus years have increasingly changed the focus when looking at a lot of different cultures' experiences, but particularly the African experience, away from, say, the United States or the Caribbean or South America, and looking at the broader Atlantic world, because that's how it was in the 18th and early 19th century. This manuscript documents the estates of a Mr. Gordon in St. Kitts, Antigua, and St. Vincent. These are 3 islands in the Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. This is a map of Antigua that you're looking at right now. Now, the British Empire decided to emancipate their slaves around 1830. And prior to that, people that owned what were called estates were urged to inventory their estates, particularly their slaves, because the slaves, as property, they were going to be compensated by the government for the disposition of that property. And so this man, Mr. Gordon, hired a surveyor to go out, create this manuscript, which has maps of the estates, as you saw. Then it has a plat plan here of the estate. Then we look at illustrations. So here is a view of a sugar mill. This is a windmill for crushing sugar cane, and a boiling house where that cane juice was reduced to sugar. And we have views of a hospital. This was a hospital for the people that lived on the estate, including enslaved people. And then, after many other illustrations, what's extremely remarkable about this manuscript is we get to actual inventories of the slaves themselves. So this is a list and description of 82 slaves from one of the estates. So we have their names right here, then their ages, their occupations, the jobs they did on the estate, their ethnicity, then their religious affiliation. So we have Methodists, we have Moravians, their marital status, and then personal characteristics about them. Some of the other inventories in this book contain information almost unobtainable anywhere else about the African ethnicities of the slaves. Many times, various different African tribes were brought in and consciously mixed up on the estates to prevent communication one from another because they had different languages, different cultural practices, and that was, of course, to make it easier to control them. So we see here on this estate we have Ghanaians, Fantis, Congos, Sokos, Mokos, Igbos. Some of them show Ashanti. There's an Ashanti down there. So really from all of West Africa. And almost no other sources record that type of information at an individual level for enslaved people from this time period. This manuscript has been fully digitized, and the text has also been fully transcribed, and it can be accessed through our digital collections. So just to wrap up, I want to say again, welcome to Hamilton College. I hope to meet some of you in person in the fall. Come up to the third floor, Special Collections, the Burke Library. We'll be glad to see you.